Good morning, everyone. Glad to see you're here on this bright day. I think we'll try to get started here. And the day starts with an explanation. Our colleague from the National Park Service, who was going to speak today over a series of photographs that date from April of 1865, that is the last days of Richmond and the Confederacy. Unfortunately, with the shutdown, the closing down of the federal government, the rules are that he may not show up to speak on any subject or act in any official capacity. He may not even arrive. So that means somebody else had to do it. Well, of course, I'm it. So you got me for the morning. All right. We're going to start on a totally new subject, which we didn't announce. And it has to do with a topic that you may never have heard of before. It has to do with the German officer who served for 8.5 years before World War II broke out between Germany and the United States as the military attaché in the German embassy in Washington, D.C. So the question is, what did he actually report that made people in Berlin think one way or another about American military preparedness? So I hope this makes some sense as we go here. Here's actually the title that you see up there is a bit of a misnomer. Friedrich von Böttcher was the man's name, who eventually achieved 3-star rank, that is the rank of a lieutenant general while he was serving in the United States by 1941. It's something of a misnomer to call him Hitler's ambivalent attaché because Hitler did not send him. He was actually chosen for that role for reasons that I will illuminate in a bit of discussion as we go here. Böttcher remains something of a supporting character, a third-rate opera character in the whole history of the run-up to World War II, where the relationships between Germany and the United States are concerned. He's always been dismissed and reduced to the level to something of a blameworthy anti-Semite. There's a little more to his story, and that's what we want to go through today. He joined the Saxon Army in the year 1900 and was commissioned as a field artilleryman. By 1913, he had also graduated from the Prussian War Academy, which was quite usual for those young men who were considered to be the best and the brightest among German military forces of that day. So he wound up in a series of different assignments. Most of them, rather than being in field artillery, he was more associated with German Army field railways. As you remember from your history courses way back in the days of your undergraduate, the Germans produced a military strategic plan under the aegis of one Alfred Schlieffen, the German chief of staff, which held that the German armies would envelop and capture the city of Paris and end the war within 6 weeks in the First World War. This did not come to pass. And so much of it depended on the mastery of German and other national railroads. When that failed, of course, everyone looked at each other and said, what's plan B? Well, there wasn't one, and the war reduced itself to a contest of stalemate for 4.5 years on the Western Front. Böttcher wound up in diplomatic assignments through the period between 1913 and 1926, when he returned to Germany to become the chief of the German Army Field Artillery School. And at the photo at the top left, you see the family is sitting around the dining table. Buttischer there in full uniform. His wife to his right, his son, Friedrich Heinrich, who should have had a considered career as a legal specialist in Germany, was diagnosed in 1928 as being the victim of schizophrenia. Later assessments of all this changed that diagnosis to manic depression. But the Nazi regime came down hard on this young man, and Buttischer had to go through many emotion to rescue his son from the intent and the legal weight of the Nazi regime. The two young women in the picture, the one standing was the younger daughter, the one with whom I had more to do because I managed to interview her and get a whole lot of family history that I otherwise would not have happened upon without her assistance. The older daughter became a doctor after medical school in Berlin, at which time she married one of her classmates, an American by the name of David K. Miller, and the two of them spent a teaching career at the University of Buffalo in New York. So they wound up thoroughly Americanized. The son, Friedrich Heinrich, changed his name after he arrived in this country, and his father had gotten him out of an indictment in Germany, wound up as an employee of the Railroad Retirement Board, and he died in 1998 in Chicago. In the interim, he had a long history of opposition to the Nazi regime, so this is part of the family history that has to be taken into account. Buttischer left that command as the commandant of the artillery school because at Geneva, the Allies, the victorious Allies, and the General Assembly of the League of Nations finally agreed to give Germany equal rights to rearm to the same level as all the other allies were. And what this did was remove the interdict on the idea that Germany could send out military attachés. So Hitler did not send Buttischer to the United States. It was simply the machinations and workings of the German army of the time. He arrived in April of 1933 to rent this beautiful mansion, this turreted structure that you see in the picture at the lower left, and it was a prominent address just above the city's Georgetown sector. So you'd have to call this neighborhood that he lived in as definitely upscale. And he came to this job with the rank of a brigadier general, which meant that he had certain social obligations that he had to fulfill all through his time in the United States. And that house was the center of a great many musical evenings and other celebrations to which were all the remaining attachés and many other American Army officers were invited as a matter of course. The room had 7 fireplaces in it, a 4-car garage out in the back, and was something suited to the role and station of this new German military attaché who came to the United States. The fact is he outranked all of the other military attachés in the city at that time, which made him what was known as the dean of military attachés. He governed where everybody sat at the banquet tables among all the other military representatives in the city at the time. So he had some considerable chops as a social arbiter in his own right. This is a picture of his desk, which was in a building behind the German embassy. And what I want to draw attention to is that the man never had a picture of Hitler anywhere near his working space. The one photograph you see on the wall, roughly to the right side of this office space, is that of Frederick the Great, who was one of Buttischer's great heroes, and in fact he had done a biography of Frederick before he arrived in this post. So it was that picture that adorned his wall, not that of the Führer, Hitler himself. This is the picture of what the German embassy at that time in the 1930s looked like. Today it's completely gone, to be replaced by a series of high-level residential condos. The only thing left is this little railing that's down the front of the entire property. So Buttischer did not operate using classified sources, either from his own side or from the American side, where anyone would have given him open secrets. All of the material that he sent back with his cables and with his written and reported material sent back to Germany by the pouch, the diplomatic pouch. The pouch was inviolate. No one was supposed to break into these things, but this was always done as a matter of course in this period. He used open sources, always available through the government printing office, things that were published by the American Army as to what its activities were in supplying militaries from such faraway places as Dutch Indonesia in that day. How many aircraft engines were exported to various places. He would collect this material and simply dispatch it back home. His access to the American establishment was genuine and extensive. There were 4 core areas in the geographic United States and in Hawaii at that time. And he got to know every one of the commandants, usually major generals in charge of these geographic subdivisions of the continental American Army. He knew every one of these people and most of their staffs by first name. Let's move on here. He considered himself in this whole effort that he got involved in to be something of a supplicant, if not a lover's suitor to the American Army. He courted individual people throughout as if he were seeking more than simply diplomatic recognition. And he claimed in his reports to be winning over the officials that represented various and sundry military command elements, including within the military intelligence division in the United States. In the picture at the upper right, here he is being presented here for the first time in full uniform, including a sword, to the Undersecretary, the Assistant Secretary of War, Harry Woodring. And the picture there is somewhat a testimony to the tense relations among the American Army's command structure. Harry Woodring was eventually purged, excluded in 1940, but Buttischer went on constantly speaking to him on whenever the occasion demanded. The tall fellow on the right in that picture was a consul within the German embassy. He did not survive the Nazi regime, was sent to a concentration camp and was murdered there in the course of things as the war progressed. Things went rather better for Buttischer in associating with other people, such as the ones you see in the photograph on the bottom of the screen here now. These were the members, the veterans of the 35th Infantry Division, which is a National Guard outfit from Kansas and Nebraska. The unit had had a dismal record in World War I. It had 4 regiments within the division, which advanced against the prepared German defenses, and with 2 regiments abreast. In the course of things, under German machine gun fire, these 2 regiments became entangled on the battlefield itself under continuous fire and made an ignominious retreat. They continued to meet all through the time when Buttigieg was the attaché here, and they invited him from 1934 to 1940 to attend their reunions. So here you see a bunch of bibulous guys, all with drinks in their hands, and enjoying the company of the guy who was the German military attaché, who always came in civilian clothing. The fellow in that picture on the extreme left is of interest. This is Ralph Truman, Harry's cousin. And Harry was a leading member of the 35th Infantry Division, a veteran of World War I. If not this occasion, on one occasion when he met Buttigieg, he sang out, "We licked you once and we can do it again." So this was the kind of the banter that the members of this little group engaged in any of these reunions after a few drinks. Buttigieg had to stop attending these reunions in 1940 because by that point the war was full on, and the sympathies of the United States were slowly shifting from isolationist to intervention. The other members of Buttigieg's circle within the United States at this time included a group of men called the Valley Campaign. Now, this was a coterie of American devotees to the history of particularly the American Civil War, and they were led, of course, by our famous native here in Richmond, Virginia, Douglas Southall Freeman. Bring him up here. The families exchanged visits constantly, and what you see is a photograph that's shot on one of these occasions where Buttigieg, on the far right, visited with Douglas Freeman and his family. Buttigieg's younger daughter, Hildegard, is standing here in the striped dress in the middle. And what is of interest to those of us living here at Cedarfield, the fellow who's a bit antsy there in the front of the group is James Douglas Freeman, who spent the last couple of years of his life right here at Cedarfield. He died here in August of 2018. To back up for a minute, there's a very telling photograph at the top right now showing Buttigieg and the French military attaché, Colonel Emmanuel Lombard. Lombard had married an American woman, and after the defeat of France, he stayed in his country to represent the Free French interests to the American Army. Of interest here is the way all these uniforms of the day look similar. They all have what's called the Sam Brown belt, the Jodhpur trousers, and the boots. They all seem to have imitated each other in the way they dress themselves. The last and most significant, you'll all recognize this fellow, is George Patton, who in 1938 and 1940 was the commandant of Fort Myer, which can be considered the ceremonial post of the Army on the East Coast. It also commands and maintains all of the accoutrements of any military funeral. that goes on at Arlington Cemetery, which adjoins the post or is part of the post. Patton, while he was as colonel, while he was the post commandant, invited Buttigieg to any significant dinner event going on at his house on the grounds of Fort Myer. During one of these occasions, another invitee began to berate Buttigieg because of the way the German government was treating Jews. Buttigieg and his wife had to quietly get up from the table and leave the affair, never to return or be invited again by Patton. But Patton and Buttigieg used to march and survey the Civil War battlefields all around the Washington and East Coast regions. Buttigieg, as it turns out, was a student of the American Civil War who knew more about the battles and the politics of that event than most American military staff officers. And Buttigieg often begged for assistance in visiting many of these sites so that he could survey the terrain, which he and Patton did with great alacrity. At one point in my research for all of this, I addressed Patton's son, who's called George III, although he was actually the fourth. George Patton III, as he called himself, had a military career that spanned his control of the 11th Armored Cavalry Regiment in Vietnam. I wrote him once to ask whether he ever had any recollection of this German attaché, and what George IV told me, yes, I did. On these marches where these two guys would survey the Civil War terrain, he often, as an 11 and 12-year-old, would go along with them. So he knew the attaché very well, and took a great deal of education about terrain from the way these two men talked to each other. So, Buttigieg in those days, he was a considered author and could write equally well in German and English. His literary style was quite good and sometimes a pleasure to read. So he published a number of articles through the American Military Institute, which publishes still to this day a academic journal called Military History, and it's still ongoing. He, at one occasion, actually spoke before a session of the American Historical Association in the city of New York, and held forth on the subject of George Washington's military problems and how they were resolved. So let's get on here. Buttigieg, of course, could not do this work all by himself, and he had to have, eventually, someone who was more expert in the whole business of the burgeoning technical side of aviation and avionics as they applied to military operations. So he acquired this fellow, Peter Ernst Riedel, who was one of Germany's leading glider aficionados and practitioners. He became the German national champion in 1933, and by 1937 he was flying for a Colombian-German association in South America, a commercial airline in South America called SCATA, that name from its Spanish name. Riedel was one of those technical geniuses who was something less than perfect as a human being. A very good-looking character. He attracted women at a great rate and returned the favor although he got more heavily involved with an American woman, an artist from Terre Haute, Indiana. He claimed never to have joined the Nazi Party, but since the entire membership roster of the Nazi Party was captured at the end of World War II and remains to this day on microfilm in the National Archives of the United States, that record shows that he joined the Nazi Party not once but twice. And the reason for that seems to be not ideological conviction, but for the fact that the party was the source of a good deal of money that allowed him to sustain his interests and his activities in aviation. The whole time he was in the United States, acting as or assigned as the assistant military attaché for air within the German embassy, he housed at the College Park Airport in Maryland, just north of Washington, D.C., this glider, which has on its tailplane, as you can see, the red bar and the Nazi symbol, the swastika. He often gave rides to American government officials, including the head of the Civil Aviation Board at the time, not only to impress these people, but to show what the state of German aviation technology was all about. As the last of the bullet points here indicates, Riedel was of amazing and consequential value to the military attaché's efforts. Most of the material reports that were sent home that dealt with anything about aviation were written originally by Riedel, but signed off on by Budischer, the military attaché. Between the two men, there was no great love, and their relationship was like a very bad marriage. As an example of what I mentioned about his roving eye, his attraction to women, the picture here is from the 1939 Cleveland Air Races, which was attended by this young-looking woman who was also a glider pilot. Her name was Hannah Reich, and she became one of the famous representatives of German aviation and a great admirer of Adolf Hitler. From a closer review of all of their correspondence with each other, I remain convinced that the two of them were lovers at one time or another, even though Riedel got involved and proposed to the young lady that you see on the right of this picture that just popped up here. Her name was Helen Klug, from a German family living in Terre Haute, Indiana. Helen was in Washington, D.C. as an art teacher in a local girls' school when she met Riedel, and the two of them became closely connected, and he proposed to her. Budischer opposed this marriage, which became part of the basis for the differences of opinion between the two guys. Budischer spent especially the years after 1939 with the outbreak of the war with Germany's invasion of Poland. He continued to bet that the isolationists would prevail in the argument over whether America should intervene in any of this or not. In November of 1938, there occurred an event in which a young German Jew living in Paris reached the German embassy there and shot a consular, Ernst vom Rath, on the grounds of the German embassy in Paris. This produced a pogrom in Germany in which some 91,000 Jews were dishoused. Over 3,000 were murdered outright. And Franklin Roosevelt, at that point, withdrew his American ambassador in Berlin, Hugh Wilson. The United States was the only country that withdrew its senior representative, as a result of this pogrom by the Nazis. What this required was that the German ambassador in Washington, by the name of Heinrich Dickhoff, also had to go home. There had to be a reciprocal arrangement between the two. This left a younger consul in the German embassy by the name of Hans Thomsen. Thomsen is one of those figures who's somewhat problematic. He is known, and it was testified to be an opponent of the Nazi regime, but one who stayed on in the German Foreign Service to see which way he could and how far he could limit the damage that was being done. The problem now in the German embassy in November of 1938, the military attaché by rank and by length of service outranked the political member. And more than that, in the following year, the German foreign ministry declared that any German representations abroad should simply ignore and no longer participate in any of the social conventions that were going on in their native capitals. Well, this shut down a great deal of the flow of information that was possible when members of the German embassies all around the world could informally approach their opposite numbers or anyone that interested them and gain credible information at this point. What this left then as a source of information was only the military chain, which Böttcher maintained upright and functioning until the very end of things. The American staff in Washington was clearly milking Böttcher by this time, and they were trying to get more information out of him than he was willing to give. The chips in this game began to center on the activities of a man that Böttcher had met for the first time in 1922. The fellow whose picture is on the lower left here, Colonel Truman Smith, is one of the great problems for historians in this period. He had been the American military attaché in Berlin from 1936 through 1939, when he was seconded home because of severe gastrointestinal attacks, and he had to leave his job. He came home as one of Franklin Roosevelt's most bitter opponents. Ideologically, Smith was conservative to the point that anything Roosevelt did, he would react against. The back channel information or chatter that went on at that time was that Truman Smith never got beyond the rank of colonel for the reason that Franklin Roosevelt struck his name from the Brigadier General's nomination list. He simply never would allow him to be promoted. Smith, however, remained Böttcher's principal source for those people that Böttcher always claimed were standing close to me, and they would oppose the forces of capital and the Jewish wire pullers that were present in the American government. He claimed that eventually these forces would be defeated. And what the great service that he provided for Böttcher in these days was that during the Battle of Britain between August of 1940, in the height of the Battle of Britain, all the way through the following year, German bombers and fighters were invading British airspace and attempting to reduce to zero the strength of the Royal Air Force in its defending role over the British capital. American attachés in London were sending home assessments done by the Royal Air Force to the American G2 run by a brigadier general by the name of Sherman Miles. These reports would reach his desk, and once Böttcher learned about this, he attempted to counteract the whole idea. And he did this by taking all the embassy cables that came to the German embassy in Washington that gave us German assessments, including what they thought was their eventual victory in the Battle of Britain. He supplied these cables to the American government through the person of Truman Smith. And this went on for a full year until one George C. Marshall put a stop to it. But yet, this is an interesting revelation about the way diplomatic exchanges can be affected and how they actually worked. In the end, this did not come to anything. It did not change American opinion, which was sliding ever more in favor of intervention against the Nazi and the Axis course of the war. Let's move. As the war breaks out on the 11th day of December, after the December 7 attack on Pearl Harbor, the Axis diplomats, in the Italians, the Germans, and the Japanese in Washington, D.C. were required to report for internment, and they were to be policed up by the FBI and corralled into a forced idol, where, of all places, the Greenbrier Hotel in White Sulphur Springs, West Virginia. This was a pretty nice deal, actually, because they didn't have much to do. And here, what you see in this picture is the principal internees there at the Greenbrier Hotel. They're all arranged in these rows by rank. So here, of course, is Buttischer down in the front row. Riedel is related, or simply left to the extreme right flank of the whole group of people. The interesting thing is that for 6 months, these people were all simply interned in what seemed to be a grand vacation. But the young lady at the upper left of this picture that just showed up is Buttischer's younger daughter, Hildegard, the one I had a great deal to do in interviewing and getting family information as I could. She initiated a school for all the children who happened to be involved in the population among those internees. And here's a bunch of her charges sitting around on the veranda of one of the buildings there. Buttischer himself never appeared in military uniform during this internment, during this space in his existence. There were a number of weddings. The family also quietly whispered to me that they thought that the FBI at the time was trying to get Buttischer to defect. He had proven himself such a student of American affairs that they thought that there was a possibility they could peel him out of away from the German cause. He never did that, and never an indication that he even considered it. So 950 persons were simply housed and fed and entertained in this period in one of the great vacation spots on the East Coast. At the beginning of that internment, the Germans and the Italians were housed cheek by jowl, shoulder to shoulder with each other. And as Hildegard told me during this phase, there was always sound coming from the Italian side. There was grand singing. Opera was always ongoing. And the FBI eventually reacted to this by thinking that the two allies, the Italians and the Germans, were just a bit too chummy. So what they did was they exchanged the Italians and the Japanese. And after the Japanese moved into the quarters that had been vacated by the Italians, there was nothing but silence. It was quiet, no opera, no more singing. So this is one of the memorable episodes in that internment phase. With 6 months gone, with 6 months past, the American embassy personnel in Berlin were repatriated in exchange for the Germans. And the way they had to do this was to lease a Swedish ship, the Drottningholm, to house all of these Axis diplomats and send them back. Now, at this point in 1942, Hitler owned all of the major ports on the European continent, except Lisbon. So that's where the ship wound up going. It had to wear bright white paint with the name of the ship in 12-foot letters on the side. This was just to protect it against attack by Germany's own U-boats as it progressed from Bayonne, New Jersey to Lisbon. At night, the ship ran with all the lights burning, and the U-boat skippers were informed not to attack this vessel. Budischer arrives in Biarritz on the 25th of May, and as Hildegard told me, she didn't see her father when the train stopped, but when she turned around to look for him, he came off the coach car in front of the one they had been riding in, and he was in full uniform, ready to go back to work. So within 2 days, he was presented to Hitler himself, as in the picture on the lower left. He was presented with something called the War Merit Cross, not the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross, but a rendition of it. He never got a field command the whole time he was back in Germany to the end of the war. He was employed at the higher levels of the German army and then the German high command to produce analyses of what he thought or what he could derive from news reports that came to him from Switzerland or from Stockholm, either way, always with a 2-week delay. But all of these news sources, he would analyze these things and produce written reports as to what Allied strategy was going to look like in the future. In one of the great events of the day, the 20th of July, 1944, is the day when German resistance placed a bomb inside Hitler's headquarters in Rastenburg, Prussia. And when it exploded, it injured Hitler, but it did not kill him. It killed 3 other guys. Budischer must have known something about this. I could never to connect all the dots here, but he spent the whole day at Potsdam, which was Frederick the Great's great mansion outside of Berlin, and he simply hid out there all day. And the reference to Thiele in the very bottom line there was Alfred Thiele was a communications expert who had been his signals officer on his staff when he was the head of the Field Artillery School, and he needed a communications man. Well, Thiele was directly involved in the conspiracy to kill Hitler. And Budischer could do nothing about it, although Thiele's wife came to implore him, threw herself on the floor in front of Budischer, begging Budischer to do something for her husband. But there was nothing to be done, and Thiele was eventually hanged with piano wire, as were all of the conspirators they could get their hands on. So the story eventually goes to an end, the end of the war. And there is Budischer in the top photograph. He's giving himself up at the headquarters of the 36th Infantry Division, 7th Army in Warnbach in Bavaria on the 30th of April. That Hitler has already killed himself the day before. He then spent the next 2.5 years in the employ of the Allied occupation authorities, first as a potential witness in the Nuremberg trials, but he was never called. And then he transferred to an activity that went on for several years into the 1950s, in which the American Army attempted to put to work what were now unemployed German generals and senior staff officers to write histories and commentary on how they conducted the war. This is still one of the major sources for people interested in the history of that period. Buttischer's capacity and abilities in the English language made him a central character in all of this. And he actually indexed what everyone else had ever written, whether in German or English, and became a central figure in what was called the Halder School, Halder being Franz Halder, the former German chief of staff, who ran this whole effort at capturing the history from the German point of view of exactly what happened during the war. As inevitably happens, the man passed on. In the picture you see him here, he's totally blind. The last postcard that he wrote to an American source was to J. Ambler Johnston, and some of you may know that name. He's the second name that always appears next to the masthead of Carneal and Johnston, which is one of Richmond's leading architectural firms. When Douglas Freeman died in 1953, the continuing correspondence between him and Buttischer transferred then to Ambler Johnston. The Valley Campaign, in which Freeman would travel to some distant Civil War battlefield in an open car, and then he would stand up in the back of this thing and lecture about what was going on, what the significance of the terrain was, an assessment of the leaders involved in the battle of that particular area. J. Ambler Johnston wasn't just an architect, he was an avid historian and member of the Civil War Roundtable in Richmond. He had served for all the years that Freeman did this as Freeman's chauffeur. He would drive the car that Freeman sat in the back of and then stood up to lecture on the various places and actions that they were considering. So the man dies in September 1967, relatively unsung, but he received a complete military honors funeral by the German government. So that ends the story as we can so far assess it. But to Ambler Johnston, he wrote the last letter that he could actually manage in his blindness. He asked the question, "Who knows that I was sent to the United States to form the basis of a friendship between the United States and Germany?" Well, this completely failed, and the mission that he had assigned for himself never reached fruition at all. So I leave it to you for an assessment of this whole story, but it's one that got me a PhD from Georgetown University, so I can pat myself on the back for that. Okay, we have microphones up here in case there's any questions. Yeah. All right. Did I explain it all pretty well? Okay, that's good. All right, is there a question? Oh. Yeah. Let me ask you. Is there any evidence that the FBI kept files on the people? Yeah, the question, Charlie asked the question, is there any evidence that the FBI kept records or tabs on all of these guys? Riedel himself caught on to this. They were tailing him everywhere he went, especially on his honeymoon. And when, when the FBI cars seemed to get lost, Riedel stopped in St. Louis to the FBI office to tell them where he was, just to stick it to the FBI, who's the tail of which they had lost him. They had files on all of the activity of the German embassy, including reading the cabled that is sent by wireless and telegraphic cable from Washington to Berlin. The line of communication went down through South America, back up over Africa, and then to Berlin. So this was relatively easy to interdict at almost any place. I put in a Freedom of Information Act request to find out what, in fact, the FBI was doing in the business of trying to get Buttigieg to defect. Well, typical of these things, what you get back is reams of paper in which there are black magic marker lines through just about every line on the page, so that you get the subject's name, but you get no basic information. So I never did get much in the way of information about how the FBI managed to keep surveillance over the members of the German embassy. By the way, they were also surveilling the members of the Russian embassy, because there was all manner of suspicion that the Russians were doing more than just diplomatic representation in the country. I'm sorry, Charlie, what was the second question?
When I was in the Army, General George S. Patton IV was one of my fathers.
Oh, right. Yeah, I had that one connection with him when I wrote him the letter asking if he remembered the German attaché. The other anecdote that I remember about George Patton IV, is that he had the 11th Armored Cavalry Regiment in Vietnam. And he came back from a meeting with Creighton Abrams one day to tell his staff that there's a new motto for the regiment. It used to be, "Find the bastards and pile on," which was the very most aggressive way to conduct anything. He says the new motto is, "Find the bastards and win their hearts and minds." So that's George's, Patton IV's approach to the post-Westmoreland regime in Vietnam. And I offer you that just as a kind of a character reference as to how George IV, actually called himself the Third, conducted an Army career. It's one of those cases in which it must have been awfully hard to be the son of George Patton Jr., old blood and guts, because it was hard to live up to the family name. So that's as much as I can say on it, Charlie. I'm sorry. Yeah. Okay.
Did Lindbergh have any relationship with the military attaché?
I wrote Lindbergh one time, asked him if he could tell me anything about the attaché. He said he never met the man, which was not true. At one time, when Buttigieg and Orville Wright were together talking about aviation, a subject that Buttigieg always let himself be educated on, Charles Lindbergh happened to walk into the room, and this glancing connection was the only thing that I could ever establish where Lindbergh actually had anything to do with Buttigieg. Lindbergh, however, was a great connection with this Colonel Truman Smith that I mentioned. They were inseparable in their opposition to Franklin Roosevelt. And Lindbergh was one of those people whom Buttigieg claimed were standing close to me and would offset the forces of Jewish capital or Jewish wire pullers. Lindbergh was one of those people that Buttischer kept referring to, even though he was not a close confidant of Lindbergh. As we all know, Pearl Harbor cut through the whole America First movement in that day. And once we were at war with Japan, the isolationist movement withered on the vine. So that's where we were with that. And Buttischer, of course, wound up in internment after that, could no more influence things at all. Yo. Okay. All righty. There's a small picture that I took myself of his tombstone outside of the city of Bielefeld in Germany. Happened to visit there. All right.